Tavernari, you're Mormon. You can't play on Sunday. And I said, hey, I'm making a lot of shots because I just came back from church. God is blessing me. And so I think when you're able to be an example to people that way, to me, that's my way of expressing my faith and of who I can stay true to who I am, regardless of any identity of what I do for a living.
Jesus line if they live righteously.
It is time for another episode of the Cultural Hall, and we don't do many sports-related episodes, so I'm excited about this because I know that there are many who care deeply and passionately not only about sports but certainly about BYU sports. I know the terminology well enough to make you feel like I know what I'm talking about, but I don't, so I'm excited to be exposed as a phony and a fraud within this conversation. He prefers that I call him JT, but Jonathan Tavernari, there we go. I already messed it up like I told him I would. Welcome into the Cultural Hall.
Richie, I appreciate you having me, my man.
Now, for a lot of people, they go, that name, it's familiar. Where do I know that name? Go ahead and tell everyone what you do, where you played, all the things and the time.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Brazil, and I came to the US. I immigrated to the US when I was 16, and I played high school basketball in Las Vegas, Nevada at Bishop Gorman High School. I was a McDonald's All-American, honorable mention, and went to BYU and had a very good basketball career at BYU. And then I spent 10 years playing professionally overseas until I retired and got started in business.
So there's a lot we'll obviously pick up with that. He's being modest. He's the winningest player from BYU and all-time leader in the three-point shots made. So, he played a little time. He can't beat the own chest, but I'll beat it for him. An amazing basketball player. So I want to start there from the beginning. Come from Brazil to the United States, and you end up in Las Vegas. As I understand it, and this may be a thing that people don't really understand, like the inside track on this, there are these high schools. There's one in southern Utah. There's one in Las Vegas where really good basketball players come from all over the country, and they happen, and I'm air quoting for people who can't see the video, they happen to all be on the same team, and it's like a junior NBA team. Is that what Bishop Gorman High School is, and how did you get into all that?
Yeah, so my story begins a little bit before that. So I'm an only child from Brazil. My mom and dad, try to have more kids, but they, with miscarriages and such.
Mm.
And then my mom is actually she just retired this year, but she is known as the greatest youth basketball coach in the history of Brazil basketball.
Jeez.
And so my mom is a living legend. She is the director of the national team. She has, she's been coaching for, she coached for 44 years, 36 of those, she was the coach of the year.
Wow.
And she's actually called, she was actually honored as the coach of the century, and the coach of the year award is named after her. And
Wow.
so my mom, obviously, as a basketball icon and legend in Brazil, she coached a guy that actually worked at BYU, was part of the staff of BYU. And me growing up, obviously I was, I was pretty good from a young age. And so word got around of how good I was. And he, this individual said, hey, I actually know the family. I played for Jonathan's mom when I was younger. Let me reach out and talk to them. And so, this gentleman reached out to my parents, to me, and said, hey, would love to recruit you. I've known your parents for quite some time, and I would love for for you to understand what I'm all about, what BYU is all about, for you to potentially ended up having a chance to see if you're good enough to play here. And so from there, working with the various organizations, the NCAA, the conference that BYU was in, I was given permission to come in and live with this gentleman in Utah. Actually, the first place I lived in Utah, if I lived here in the U.S., was Utah. I lived in Provo, and I went to Timview High School.
Okay.
And I went to Timview High School for a year, and it was my first experience in America. Basketball wise, I did great. I was all state. I had a few triple doubles. And that's also when I got introduced to the gospel.
Hmm.
And how I ended up in Las Vegas is because public school systems only allow foreign exchange students to be 1 year in a public school. After that, you have to go back to your home country or you have to go to a private institution. And through connections that I made the year that I was here in Utah, I ended up being able to become really close friends and stay with a member family in Las Vegas, and which is the first time I attended the temple. And so when I was at Timview, I ended up going to school. I grew up Catholic. I was an altar boy,
Sure.
and but I ended up having a lot of friends that were members of the church. And every morning I hitched a ride with the guy, the kid that was the son of the bishop to the
Oh,
ward that I was zoned for. And when Elder Uchtdorf says, live the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words.
mhm.
The guy's name is Andrew Cusick, and Andrew was the epitome of that, and lived the gospel at all times. And when I asked question, he used words. And I just became interested in the gospel. And as you probably are aware, Richie, there ain't a whole lot of Catholic churches in Provo, Utah.
Yeah.
And so going to church, which was something that my mom and dad instilled in me, I couldn't happen a ton. And so I said, let me just go and let me take a chance and go to the Word.
Mhm.
I went to church for the first time. I was wearing jeans and a white polo, right? And
Right.
couldn't feel more like a fish out of the water. And but everybody was super nice to me, and I said, hey, I want to come back. And I started learning about the Book of Mormon, and I started learning about the restored gospel, and I started learning about Jesus appearing in the Americas. But to me, what changed everything the most to me was learning about eternal families. Think back when you're 17 years old and imagine you're halfway around the world. Your mom and your dad aren't really around. Oftentimes I was lonely. I had friends and I had, people that I was close to, but
Sure.
I didn't have family, right? And eternal families was the hook. I don't want to say the hook like it's bad, but it was what got me to really want to investigate the gospel. And so that entire year, I ended up having a girlfriend who was, and my wife. The funniest thing is my wife has often said, I cannot thank your girlfriend enough because, she kind of set the standard to what, a good daughter of Christ looks like.
Oh,
And and from that point on, I only dated girls that I could see myself marrying, right? And
mhm.
but I had a normal teenage life, and but I was really excited about getting baptized. And I had a few experiences. I tweet a lot. I'm always on Twitter, and but I had an experience what I really felt like it was that I really felt like the church was true. And that was, my mom had given me a cross necklace. In Brazil, it's common you wear a cross,
Sure.
and I
Sure.
couldn't find it. And I remember, I looked everywhere. And when I mean everywhere, I mean at my locker, all throughout the high school, the basketball locker room, classes. I even had my buddy Andrew drive me back to Spanish Fork to see if I could find it there somewhere.
Hmm.
I looked it through my house. I looked at the church. I looked everywhere. And then I finally said, I need to say a prayer. And then I opened the Book of Mormon. I said a prayer. I read a scripture and I said a prayer. And as clear as I am seeing you on that studio with headsets and you're seeing me here,
Mhm.
I saw where that necklace was. And that necklace was on the gutter in front of my house under the snow.
Wow.
And I went over there, I dug through the snow, and lo and behold, the necklace was there.
Yes.
And and so at that point I said, I know I want to get baptized. I believe this stuff. I want to get baptized. And I went and I talked to the bishop, to Andrew's dad. His name is Mark Cusick. And then we came up with a plan. We talked about me getting baptized in Brazil for me to be able to show my mom and dad, kind of what they're all about so they could be a part of it.
Sure.
And I ended up getting baptized that next summer, which was July 16th, 2005. And then I went to Las Vegas, right? I was pretty good at basketball, but then one of the things I was like, I want to live with an LDS family. I went to Las Vegas, and it was the greatest thing for me because I had to go to seminary at 5:50 in the morning.
Wow.
I wanted to graduate from seminary. So if you remember, Richie, those like stacks of those packets that you had to complete,
Yes.
back in our time, I
Mhm.
had to do it one for the Doctrine and Covenants, New and Old Testament, because we were learning about the Book of Mormon. And so I did all of that. I graduated from seminary. I was able to earn my duty to God doing a service project involving Bishop Gorman and the Diocese of Las Vegas, and all of that just because of my faith. And I had some crazy things happen to me during my senior year in terms of legal troubles, and I'm not eligible to play. Oh no, he's eligible. Oh, I got to go to court, and all of these things. But ultimately, what kind of got me to BYU was that I knew the church was true. I
Mhm.
had the hardest decision I ever made to my life was not to go on a mission. But I felt deep in, and I still believe today, which caused a lot of ruckus with a lot of people on social media. I still believe that the impact that I have, that me personally,
Mhm.
and other LDS athletes of high profile, like, because not every single LDS athlete is an All-American, much less a McDonald's All-American,
Sure.
much less someone that goes to BYU and sets a bunch of records,
Right.
right?
Right.
And goes on and has a public career in Europe where like I'm getting to meet the 12 and the 70 and participate in the Rome Temple. And so, but I'm a still believer that for my path, it was right for me not to serve an LDS, a 2-year LDS mission, because of the impact that I've been able to have, because of the person that I have been able to marry, and all the services that we've done. But back then, it was a really hard decision for me to make. And
Sure.
so, but I ended up at BYU. I had an opportunity to go to Duke. I had a conversation with Coach K, and hey,
Wow.
are you going to go on a 2-year mission?
Mhm.
Or are you, can you go to college? And I said, honestly, I don't know, which is crazy, right? Because knowing what I know now, I'd be like, I ain't going on no mission. Let's go. But back then, and up to this point, and I say that jokingly, but, because it was the hardest decision I had to make.
Sure.
And because I do wear my faith in my sleeve. And so, but, out of everything, I decided to go to BYU. I was recruited by everybody. But I chose BYU because in my mind, I'm not going to go serve a mission. But I do want to serve the Lord, and what better way than to represent Him in His university? So
Yeah.
I got to BYU, and then I had the career that I had, marry my sweetheart, and then
All right,
ended up.
all right, all
uh,
right. Hang on. Let me get
so
in here real quick. I want to ask you a few questions. So, mom, phenomenal coach, award winning year after year after year after year. What was that pressure like in that household? Because you're the only child of the best
uh,
coach in the country, and you're doing the sport that she does. So, you are, whether intentionally or not, representing your mother's intentions for the future of that. How was that? Too much? A lot? Not even spoken of? Do whatever you love and I'll support you.
yeah. And my mom wanted me to be a soccer player. She wanted me to be a goalkeeper. My very first soccer game, we lost 8-1, and that was the beginning of the end of that. And then she wanted me to be a judo fighter, big
Which is
judo,
super
big,
big in
super
Brazil, right?
big.
Yeah.
And I was pretty good because I've always been big. But because of a basketball tournament, I missed, kind of like going between a belt to the other.
Mhm.
And I was like, there's no chance I'm going to redo 6 months of being a white belt again. And then I was always pretty good at handball, at the team handball where they have the goals and you have to throw the ball. I was actually pretty good. I was with the national team when I was 14 and 15. And
Jeez.
so I was legit, but basketball has always been there. I never considered pressure, which is one of the reasons, probably the biggest challenge that I have as a parent myself, is I don't think about pressure as, hey, you need to work hard and you need to wake up early and get on a treadmill and you need to go get a workout in and all of these things, because I never consider, pressure a bad thing. I considered pressure a privilege.
Mhm.
And so, growing up, that was just part of my upbringing. You need to be good and you need to put in the time, and there is no other way.
Is it something? So you've mentioned quite a bit about your mom. Tell me about dad. Is Pops there? He's the same
Yeah.
way, showing up in maybe some different ways, and also instilling the hard work, or is he like, whatever your mom wants, I'm here. Let's get this.
So a little bit, but I think my dad was, my mom jokes around that my dad's my hero. And, and so, but I think it's because my dad is very laid back, right? And my dad was always there to support and show love. Whereas with my mom, it was very, you need to do this, you need to get it done, you do it, do it, do it, do it. And because she was also coaching me, right? That was that. And so my dad was always, playing the role of the compassionate one. And hey, you got to work hard. I mean, like, what do you expect? But do it in a loving kind of way. My dad has had a career in soccer, but mainly as being a sports administrator. He works for the city where I grew up in São Paulo, and kind of runs the sports, for the city. And so, but he was always there. My parents are very close. They're retired. They're actually now here with me in the U.S.
Nice.
Spending a lot of time. But my dad was always more the laid back one, because my personality is very much like my mom. We are hooked on a 330-volt battery nonstop. And so my dad was a little bit more laid back always.
So the name, one of the things that I appreciate, kind of the symbolism when serving a mission, people will talk about. Remember that you have the name of the Savior on your chest, right? That you
Right.
are an elder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I do want to talk about kind of the decision on the mission. That's not where we're going right now. But you now have your parents around, so grandparents. They're able to be with your two kids.
Yeah.
And the name, Tavernari means something to you, means something to your mom. How are you passing that on to what it means to your kids? Are you intentionally doing it, or is it a natural thing where they're like, yeah, that name means this, and this is what I need to do to be a Tavernari?
Yeah, so I have my wife and I have two kids. We had four miscarriages in between them. We have a 12-year-old and a 4-year-old. The 4-year-old likes me to call him Zion Maui, but not Zion Tavernari. And so, he thinks we're related to Maui and Moana. And then my older boy, who's 12, he actually saw most of my professional career,
Mhm.
right? We moved back from Italy back to the US just around the pandemic when he was about 7, 8 years old. And so he saw it. I mean, he would see people stop me on the street, ask for autographs, and even now, or because I'm still close to BYU, I work at BYU with ESPN and BYU TV. He sees, hey, there's JT, hey, there's Tavinari, and so in the basketball world, and then some, he realizes that hey, all of this has been made possible because my dad accomplished all the things that he did,
Mhm.
because my grandma taught him everything he knows. And so my son carries that. There have been situations where somebody walks up and said, "Hey, Tavinari, you related to this guy?" And my son, will say, "Hey, yes, I am." And he's also a pretty good basketball player in his own
Mhm.
term. And so, it becomes, I think, a little bit more about. And what I tell him, I say, "Hey, look, you're going to be tall, you're going to be dark, you're going to be handsome." And my son has the most amazing personality. He's very outgoing, in sharing the gospel because he sees me do it, right? I mean, he has a really good game. I drive separate from my wife. I take him to the temple grounds and I'm like, hey, you need to be here and showing gratitude to the Savior for everything that you have in life,
Yeah.
because not everybody has the opportunity to bear their testimony, doing what they love. It's a privilege, and the pressure that we get, it's a privilege. And so you need to welcome the hard times of having to wake up early and sacrifice, because this is the way that our family bears testimony of the Savior. And so that's one way that I try to get him to understand who he is and who he's come from, and how he can best serve the Savior moving forward.
So take me to you. You sort of mentioned the hardest decision that you've made in your life is to not serve what would be a traditional mission, and I appreciate that you couched it because I'm sure uh, uh, knowing how the internet is, the amount of shade that people would be like, well, you still should have, JT. You still, all the
Yeah.
people's opinions that they have. I appreciate that you reflected that it is a personal choice and that
Yeah.
people can receive that personal revelation for them as individuals. God, what is it that you would have me do that will best serve my skills and ability? But take me to the moment that you made the choice to not go. Was it fasting and lots of prayer? Give me the scenario, and then once you made the decision, what was the reaction with you and with other people around you?
Yeah, so ever since the beginning, my mom has been working, she has been baiting herself backwards, to be able to give me opportunities for me to be here.
Hmm.
And I don't come from a family from means. It's not like my parents are multimillionaires and I was born in a silver spoon. My parents, when they say about, labor through the dust and, through the drops of your sweat, right? When they say that, that was very much my mom and dad. And so they had to sacrifice everything you can possibly think of for me to come to the US after, and, to be able, not even with the goals of me becoming, the basketball player that I did, but for me to get an education, right?
Hmm.
And so to me, once I decided to get baptized, I was very much set on going to college. I wasn't set on going to BYU, but and so the decision for me was I really believe this stuff.
Hmm.
But in consulting with my mom and dad, and out of respect for their sacrifice for me to be here, for me to go to college, I wouldn't have had a chance to go to college if it wasn't for basketball.
Right.
And what if I go on a mission, I get hurt, or something happens, or and so as I considered all of that, and I consider how good I was, because here's the thing, I was a really good basketball player. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made to the levels that I did.
Sure.
But I was really good in high school. Like I led the state of Nevada in points and rebounds. I was in magazines that, you would only see like the Kevin Durant's
Hmm.
of the world. And so to me, it became more of something that, what can I do to continue my mom and dad, that honors my mom and dad's sacrifice, but also puts me in a position that I can perfect my testimony. Because to that point, Richie, I had only really known about the gospel for about a year and a half,
Hmm.
right? Because I learned about the gospel, sometime in November, December, January of 2004, 2005. I get baptized in that summer. And then the following year, I'm still learning. That's the first time that I'm an actual member. I'm passing the sacrament. I'm blessing the sacrament. And so, and then with all of that, all of the colleges and visits and all of these things that I am possibly doing, and so, and it was a really difficult decision. And I remember going to the temple, going to the Las Vegas temple. I remember talking to my bishop. I remember talking to my stake president. Now, in full transparency, and I'm always this, my bishop that year was, I joked that he was one of the three Nephites, because you could not think of someone more loving, kind, welcoming, receptive, just putting his arms around me and just loving me for who I was, regardless of any decision that I had made or that I would make, right?
Hmm.
My stake president kind of put me a little bit on a, I don't want to say that he shamed me, but he put a little bit on the spot, like, oh, that you need to serve a mission, that you have to, you absolutely have to. And I feel like he didn't take the time to understand all of these other variables that my bishop did.
Right.
And when I say about the impact I can have on people is, I speak four languages fluently. And, for most of my basketball career in Italy, I was the only member of the church playing for any of the major professional sports in basketball, soccer, and volleyball. I got to do multiple events, multiple speaking sessions with Area 70s, with stake presidents, with temple presidents, with members of the Quorum of the 12,
Hmm.
to the point that as we were on the Rome temple on the dedication, my boys on my shoulder, a couple of Elder Oaks, Elder Iring are passing by, Elder Christofferson, Elder Uchtdorf. They recognize me from BYU. They
Wow.
come and shake my hand and give my little boy a high five. And
Hmm.
so all of these things, and then with the financial things that come from being a professional player, to be able to help members in need, to be able to do food drives, clothing drives, organize things. And so that to me was, the answer, that the confirmation to my wife and I that I made the right decision not serving a mission, because of all of these things that happen. And they wouldn't have happened, if had I gone on a mission. Now maybe they would have, I don't know.
Sure.
But part of life is you make a decision and you live on it.
Yep.
And I'm a firm believer that if you are living the gospel the right way, God will open the right doors for you, regardless if you take a wrong turn somewhere. And all of the opportunities, like for instance, just in the last 2 weeks, I've been asked twice to do two different young man camps speaking activity for two stakes. And so, because people know who I am, because they see my testimony, and having the ability to be able to do these things and serve alongside my wife, are blessings that to me stem from that decision that I made.
Yeah. I want to take a quick break. Before we get there, I want to make sure that I follow this up. The four languages, I'm guessing English, Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish. Am I right?
That's right.
Okay. I didn't want to just make that assumption, but I'm glad to know that I am accurate in that. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're diving deep into the to the heart of it with JT. That's coming back in the second block of the Cultural Hall. I had an email from someone who listens to the Cultural Hall. I believe it was not a lifer, but a convert, who said, "Hey, Richie, are you still teaching the podcast classes?" And the answer is yes. In fact, I have even fine-tuned it more than I ever had before. So you might be asking, well, Richie, how do I get in on that? Well, you can always email contact@theculturalhall.com, or you can find me on social media wherever I'm at, Richie T. Stedman, and reach out and say, "Hey, I listen to the Cultural Hall. I would love to learn more about podcasting or your podcasting services, a class, a cohort." There's a group of people. I've even taught the ward historian about podcasting, what it is and how it might be a great benefit to people. If that's something that you're interested in, whether it's for your business or just for your private hobby, maybe something you see your future in, would love to be able to help you along the way. You can find me again anywhere on social media, Richie T. Stedman, or you can just contact us, contact@theculturalhall.com. Look forward to hearing from you. Let us podcast together. To be clear, this is still a show. Here in the second block of the Cultural Hall, remember that you can become a Patreon saint of the Cultural Hall. You go to patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. For as little as $5 a month, you get to get the episodes earlier than anyone else. You get to be a part of the secret but not sacred Facebook group that everyone that's a Patreon saint is hanging out in. And most importantly, probably, it just shows that you care about the show that we do. It means that you find value in it and you're willing to give back. So go to patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. JT, success has been earned and has followed you throughout your life. I would be curious as to how. I always like the term check yourself before you wreck yourself, but being great, holding records, being skilled, having the opportunity to play professionally, it is easy, I think, for one to become a jerk or become super prideful or any of those things. Did you find yourself ever doing that? And if not, how were you able to check yourself before you wrecked yourself?
I am grateful I'm the one answering that question and not my wife, because she would go for on and on, and I can give you the cliff notes. But absolutely, my wife and I actually joke around that if she had met me as a freshman or a sophomore at BYU, I would never ever been able to win her heart over, right?
Mhm.
Because I really, I had an attitude. And, I had early success, because of what I did in high school. And then in college, I was the freshman of the year. And, I was on cloud nine. And then I had a sophomore year that I doubled all of my numbers. I broke records. And, I, I had a massive attitude. And, I think where the time that really kind of changed for me was, in the middle of my junior year, about, October, November of my junior year. I knew that I wouldn't be able to go to the NBA it was a long shot, mainly because, the way the games evolve, right? I mean, Bill Russell just laid it in, and then Jordan dunking everywhere, and
Mhm.
Steph Curry shooting threes. The game involved, and what I did, what my skills hadn't gotten to the point where the NBA was at that point, you know. And
Mhm.
so I knew that my career would be in Europe, and I always had in mind that I wanted to marry someone before I left BYU, because I wanted to marry someone who knew who I truly was and lived with me for a year before we had to embark on, this crazy adventure that we were going to go overseas.
Mhm.
And, I had girlfriends. I dated a soccer player, a basketball player. I dated someone on the volleyball team. Usually when you're athlete, you date a lot of other athletes.
Yeah.
I dated other people, but I had a serious girlfriend that just didn't, we never went anywhere. Like, it was stuck.
Mhm.
And I never saw forward progression. And after we broke up, I knelt down and said a prayer, and I said, God, there is a blonde girl with blue eyes from Utah who is ready to marry me right now. It is your job to put her in my life because you know the righteous desires of my heart. And that was on a Saturday. And excuse me, that was on a Sunday. On Monday, I met my wife, and I got her phone number. On Tuesday, we had our first date. On Wednesday, we had our first kiss. On Thursday, we had our second date, and then on Friday, I asked her to marry me, and we've been together ever since.
What?
Yeah.
Uh, okay. Or I yeah very so man, I am not speechless. I'm going to fumble my way through this. You hear about stories like this,
Yeah.
and I think the natural response to a story like this is that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Except you are walking out how very uncrazy it is, and how I guess what how when you're prepared and intentional and specific that God will meet you where you're at. Tell me how that has worked. That
Yeah.
seems like a
So,
recipe for disaster.
yeah, and I am looking at my son right now, and if he ever tries to do that, he is getting disowned and the last name taken away. And so, but here's the thing, Richie, God does meet us where we are. And my wife was in the very same boat as I was. My wife had, some physical issues, then had some emotional issues. But then she was finally at a place where she also dated someone for a long time, a little bit longer than I did, but it never felt, forward progress. And so she was at a place that she was ready to meet someone and go to the next step of her life. And I was at the same boat, right? And again, this is something that life taught me to be like this, especially because I had to do a lot of maturing, from age of 16 to 18 to 19 when I got to college.
Mhm.
I mean, I didn't have my mom and dad next to me. Like a lot. I mean, did I make some mistakes? I made some mistakes. Kids do dumb stuff, right?
Sure.
But I never, but I also had to, like, I had to make decisions on the fly. Like, is this right or wrong? And how would an adult behave? What's the right way to do it? And I had to figure that out on my own. And so, because my wife also had to mature from that perspective, we were both at a place that we knew what we wanted, right? Now, we got engaged right away. And then we had a 9-month engagement because I needed to finish the season.
Sure.
And then because, when I was in college, I was actually one of the top prospects, in Brazil. And so I was actually part of world championships teams, Olympic teams, Tournament of Americas. I was playing for the national team as the only kid that's not a professional player. And
Mhm.
so I had obligations, and then I came back, and that's when we got married, in September of 2009. But because we had a lot of time to get to know each other, I mean, it almost reassured all of the things, but it got to a point where, it's funny because it gave us exactly what we needed. Like, my wife and I started talking, and we started texting, and we started speaking on the phone, and we started seeing each other. And it never got to a point that we're like, whoa, like things are getting way too serious. It was always in a way that it was loving, kind, together, full of harmony, where I was getting to know her and she was getting to know me and my story. And the more we got to know each other, the more we were falling in love with each other.
Mm.
And my story about being a convert. And one of the things I'm most grateful for is that she grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and not in bubble of Utah. And so I did have some girls that I dated that really liked me, but they're like, I need to marry someone that served the mission.
Mm.
And I mean, to each their own,
Sure.
right?
Everyone
But
gets to make their own choice, but yeah,
yeah, but I'm grateful that my wife always has been able to see beyond that, right? And she's been able to see, hey, look, I know the type of man you are, how hard you work, and I mean, because she would see it. I mean, like, hey, good morning, how are you? And she's like, it's 5:30 in the morning. Why are you doing up? And I'm like, what you mean, my girl? Like, I'm one of the best players in the country. I gotta go in, I gotta go work out.
yeah,
And she would see my efforts in trying to get good grades to go to school. And so like I think you said it perfectly, Richie. God met us where we were,
Mhm.
and He put us on each other's path. And I truly feel like that is, I've never won the lottery, but I think that's because I lucked out with winning the lottery of my wife.
Yeah. I was gonna say yes, you did. It was just with your wife. It wasn't the financial lottery. Did
Yeah.
she? And joking, of course, but was she like, God bless me with a good-looking, tall Brazilian gentleman, dark features, very specific. I thought that was unique, where you're like blonde hair, blue eyes. Let's do it. Come on, meet me with this thing.
So she wasn't as specific as I was,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But she was praying to meet someone that was also of the same ideology and had the same interest and the same commitment that she was. You know what I mean?
hmm
My wife speaks five languages. She speaks English, French, Arabic, and then she learned
Oh, geez.
Italian and Portuguese. And she knows Arabic because she was on track to work for the government,
Wow.
study abroads in Jordan, translating documents. And if you think back to 2007, 2008, 2009, that was a hot, the
Yeah,
Middle East was a hot place to be in terms of, a lot of terrorist activities and all of that. And so that's what she was, on pace to do and on track to achieve. And but God had other plans, and then we met, and she put all of that on hold for us to be able to have our lives. And the interesting part of this, Richie, is my wife will be the first to tell you, I'm not the one saying this to minimize her whatsoever, but she'll be the first to tell you that I'm very much of an extrovert. She's not an introvert, but she's also not all the way out there like I am, right?
sure.
And in my patriarchal blessing, it talks about me working hand in hand with Ephraim, which is the tribe that she's from. I'm actually from the tribe of Benjamin.
hmm
And so, we kind of make a lot of parallels with that, where my work of serving, of talking about, of preaching of Christ, of rejoicing in Christ, of loving Christ, is a public one where I get to go in podcasts like this, and at BYU TV and on ESPN and so on. Whereas her work is much more on the behind the scenes, where she will visit with young women. She's the young women's leader in
hmm
our ward. And but not only that, when we were in Italy, she was the Relief Society president,
Wow.
and we oversaw dozens of service projects that ultimately brought more than 100 people to the church. And these things were possible because of her work in the background, visiting individual members.
hmm
Now, my attention that I brought to the situation as a professional athlete, as a public professional player. And so, my wife has very much put on the armor of God to serve, in the trenches where, my way that I serve is a little bit more on the spotlight.
Sure.
And that's why we feel like we make a formidable team, because we're fulfilling the both needs where the Lord needs us.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things, as we kind of skip through some of your life, you, I have talked to people who they are athletes, right? You were the best in high school, And then you come to the United States and that's an experience. And it's because of basketball. And then you're going to college and you're able to get an education and it's because of basketball. And then you're able to go overseas and you're able to play basketball and you become a celebrity for all intents and purposes, right? You are an athlete that people look to, that you're inspiring, etc. And ultimately, you have to retire at some point, and people will talk about a loss of identity of I'm the player, I'm the this, and they have to switch. And some people kind of get lost in that. Talk to me about the identity shift for you from, I'm JT, I'm the player, I'm the guy, to I still got a lot of life to live. I'm JT the dad. Is that what I am? I'm JT the business guy. And more than just the specific like profession and how you spend your time, but like how and what did you do as far as shifting that identity from I'm JT the basketball player to who you are today?
Well, I'm still very much JT the guy. Like
Yeah.
I'm the guy. I'm the man. I can tell you that. But my license plate actually shows JT 45 because that was my number.
Hmm.
And so, but I think that to answer your question is because I always saw, and this is true, like I love basketball. It has given me everything that I have. If it wasn't for my parents' sacrifice in the game of basketball, I wouldn't be who I am today.
Hmm.
Because of basketball, I got to become a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Because of basketball, I got to go to BYU. Because of basketball, I met my wife. Because of basketball, I got to be, in a position to be a professional athlete. But to me, my identity has never shifted away from who I truly am because I always use those things to talk of Christ. And so to me, it wasn't a massive transition. Now, I missed that. There were times that I missed basketball dearly. Just recent, BYU had a massive game on Tuesday against Kansas. And I was working with ESPN and the BYU TV crew. And I missed basketball like crazy because the gym got loud and I got chills. And I'm like, I remember knocking down three-pointers and the crowd going wild like it's going right now. But because of basketball and everything I've been able to accomplish, all other areas of my life have been impacted because of what I do with everything that I get from those areas, which is opportunities to talk about the Savior. As you can see behind me, as you can imagine in this day and age of Zoom, this is a pretty good conversation starter,
Sure.
right? Oh, are you a basketball player? Did you play basketball? Let me look you up. And when you look up, somebody created a Wikipedia page of me. And I promise you that it wasn't me. I give you my word. With a few different price figures around me, I can tell you I'm not the one that put it together.
Hmm.
And so, but because they do that, then I get to talk about, hey, this is where I come from. This is what I did. And then I got baptized. I became Mormon. I went to BYU, and here I am. And so to me, that transition from, basketball player to businessman hasn't truly been like, oh my gosh, it's stressful, it's heartbroken, I forget who I am
Hmm.
because of what I did with the attention that I got. And then obviously because I am who I am and I did what I did, I get to be a chance to be in a spotlight with BYU TV, ESPN, ESPN radio, locally here in Utah. I'm always, involved in sports, and it always goes back to hey, but you're pretty you share your testimony a lot on social media. Tell us about that. And so what I do with the attention that I get, to me, has been the key, not to be the frustrated retired player,
Hmm.
the Uncle Rico, per
Yeah.
se.
If I could just step back into that game one more time, right? So drilling down on that then a little bit more specifically and putting you on the spot a little bit. If you are not JT the basketball player, if someone says, "What is your identity? Who are you?" Who are you?
Every time that I share my testimony, um, or I start a talk or I start something, I said, hey, my name is Jonathan Tavernari. You guys know me as JT. I'm a child of God and I'm a disciple of Jesus Christ. And that's the way that my wife and I talk. That's what we've taught our son to say every time. Hey, I'm a child of God and I'm a disciple of Jesus Christ. And everything else that comes after that is just a consequence. Surely, this mortal life is hard,
Mhm.
and we have our ups and downs, and mortality is it's a big challenge. But with everything that my wife and I do, we try to remember that this is just a blip on the grand scheme of things.
Sure.
And all the time, a lot of, I mean, Richie, I think for all of us, and you would agree with me, sometimes that's easier to, easier and harder to do than others.
Sure.
Sometimes when you really have the spirit, you're like, oh, come on, me and love it and give me mountains to climb. And other times you're like, can I just get a little rowing boat come by and pick us up from the ocean? And so, but that's who I am. And and I feel like my identity is so intertwined into my faith in Christ and my faith in the gospel, that all of the things that I do come from that. Like today, I run a tech company, with overseas, with all of the responsibilities to be in the Americas. On my off hours, I coach my son's basketball team, and we're pretty darn good. But before every meeting that I have, after every meeting that I have, before every practicing game that I have with my boys, we say a prayer.
Mm.
It's because I am a disciple of Jesus Christ. I'm a child of God, and everything else is secondary to that.
In a day and in an age where that's less popular, certainly you probably don't, experience as much adversity in this, being in Utah as you might other places. But I'm sure that you faced some of this playing overseas, etc. It's not particularly popular to believe in Jesus or believe that you are a child of God and be able to wear that on your sleeve. When you have had the opportunity to be in those situations where maybe it wasn't looked so favorably, how did you handle yourself, or how did you deal in that?
Yeah, so I've always, because of the attention that I was able to get from an early age, where even in Brazil, we always had 500 people, 1,000 people watching my games. And then when I got to high school, high school gyms were often, full of people. In Las Vegas, they had to move a lot of my games to a different location because of how many people were coming to watch us play. And then at BYU, obviously. And so I've always been used to having, thousands of people screaming, unpleasant and unkind things to me. So a Joe Schmo saying something, or a challenge or adversity coming from my religion, it was never a big deal for me. Now I have done a lot of things, Richie, that, like you said, you mentioned with my mission thing, that are unpopular. I played on Sundays. On Sundays, I go in grocery shop sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
If we need something to finish a meal, lo and behold, I will not put the steak back on the fridge. So I can, I will follow up on that. There have been team instances where we had a team party or a team event on a Sunday. I attended that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the way that I personally approach that is I am going to be the very best role model of Christ that I can in that situation at that point in time,
Mm-hmm.
and just gonna let the chips fall. And so, those are the choices and that I personally make, right? And that you're talking about passing to your children. That's what I hope to pass to my son. I'm like, look, because of your, if regardless if you become a basketball player or a businessman, there are some things that just need to happen, and they need to happen, during church hours, or they need to happen on a Sunday. Don't forget who you are, because I very much feel like because of who I am, and I am very confident in who I am, I can be a light on the top of a hill. I can be, a lighthouse showing light and sharing with folks who I am, regardless of trying to, hey, I'm maybe gonna, step back and not face that issue. I can't tell. One of the best games I had in high school actually happened on a Sunday, where, I wasn't even baptized yet, but I really believed it, and I already had my baptism date scheduled.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, listen, I'm gonna have 40 college coaches watching me play that decided to go to watch this tournament, to watch this championship game, and it's because I'm a part of it. They're gonna be there. So I'm not gonna show up. I'm like, no, I'm gonna take a cab away from my team. I'm gonna go to a ward. I showed up to the ward wearing Nike sweats and flip-flops. I took the sacrament. As soon as I took the sacrament, I heard the first talk and I left. And I went to the game and I had 42 points. against one of the very best, traveling teams in the country.
Wow.
And from that point on, I start, the floodgates open. Notre Dame, Indiana, UCLA, Pitt, Virginia Tech, Florida, you name it, they all came after me.
Mhm.
And, to the point that I remember vividly joking with there were two brothers that used to own Adidas. They're called the Pump Brothers.
Mhm.
They were courtside as I was playing. They're going, Tavernari, you're Mormon. You can't play on Sunday. And I said, hey, I'm making a lot of shots because I just came back from church. God is blessing me. And so I think when you're able to be an example to people that way,
Mhm.
to me, that's my way of expressing my faith and of who I can stay true to who I am, regardless of any identity of what I do for a living.
Yeah. It's significant to note, too, that there are lots of people that can do, air quotes, all the right things in the right way and have no idea who they actually are in relation to God. They can be doing a checklist and not have any sort of testimony about, the true divinity of who they are as a creation of God. Sort of a topic that I would just be curious, very briefly, because it's sort of current eventy, but I would be curious as to your perspective. BYU, whenever they play elsewhere, it is common for them to get chants. F the Mormons is one of the things that people really like to chant. Football games, basketball games. What? Tell me how what you feel about that.
So I have to say this. I never experienced that. I
Uh-huh.
never experienced the F the Mormons.
Uh-huh.
And knowing myself, I would have had fun with it. Where I probably would have made a couple of 3-pointers and go to a student section and I would start saying, F the Mormons along with them. I would probably call them out on it. But the one things that I had to deal with in that subject was when a lot of the places that I played, they would chant, he's illegal, get a visa.
Oh,
And
oh,
now,
geez. Oh
now
my
can I tell
gosh.
now, Richie, usually the reaction that I get, now here's the thing. I have thick skin. Now, the reaction that I get from you is not most the reaction that I get from people when I tell that story. They start laughing, they start just going in laughter. And that never really bothered me, you
Uh-huh.
know. But I think back, can you imagine in this day and age in a UNLV game, the crowd chanting he's illegal, get a visa?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I remember vividly being at an Air Force game and some drunk cadet yelling Tavern at the free throw line, and I chuckled at that one. Tavernari, as soon as I graduate and get my license, I'm gonna go bomb your country.
Oh my gosh.
And the entire gym starts laughing, and I'm laughing, and I'm like, what is happening? And and so I, people will say stupid stuff all the time. Now,
Yes.
obviously, we're talking about at this at this meeting, this podcast right now, this episode, we're only highlighting the great things and some of my accomplishments. But something that my wife and I talk about when we try to teach our kids that hopefully we're not judged for the worst thing you've ever done. The same way that it's not fair for us to ask that and be judged only by the best things you've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
And so, obviously that is completely wrong and you shouldn't be chanting after the Mormons.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people are ignorant. I mean, they even say Mormons aren't Christians, and I'm like, there's the freaking name of Jesus Christ in our name, and you don't say we're Christians, then I don't understand what you're saying. Now, if you want to talk about theology and the Godhead, but good grief, Bob, don't put us all in one single segment. And so a lot of times, with American pop culture, people just go with the flow. They'll say whatever it comes to their mind, but I gotta say, I've never experienced that as a player. I've never been on a crowd where that was said.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing myself, I probably would have had fun with it
Yeah.
and turned on. The closest thing I ever got to that, Richie, was at San Diego State. They have their student section. It's called The Show.
Okay.
And if you Google Richie, SDSU for San Diego State University, The Show Mormons, you will see so many of them dressed as missionaries with bike helmets and, during the student section. And can I tell you, the best approach to this was what the church did when the Book of Mormon play came out in New York, which was take ads on a taxi and say, the show will entertain you for a night. The book will change your life forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a great way to be able to embrace that. I appreciate you taking that question because I gave you no sort of heads up that we would do that. Let's take a quick break. A couple questions that we ask everyone that we step into the cultural hall with. I'll get to those. We'll get to that and maybe one or two other things as we wrap up this episode with JT coming back in the third block of the cultural hall. BestDJinUtah.com is the website. That is where you go if you would like me to come and DJ your event. Now, will I do a family reunion where you all wear the same t-shirts? You bet I will. Will I travel to wherever you're at? Uh-huh. Am I reasonable as far as what I cost? Yes. Yes. Do I bring a good time? Yeah, all the things. Listen, Best DJ in Utah, it's my company. It's a thing I do that allows me to be able to have the time to do the cultural hall. So if someone's getting married, you think, man, they need a great DJ. You're throwing a party, whether it's a 50th or 60th or 40th or 20th or whatever the party is. I've done them all and would love to be able to do that. An anniversary party, certainly done those. I did a baptism in 2023. Yeah, we did a big dance party at a baptism. Spoiler, not a Mormon baptism, but it was fun nonetheless. BestDJinUtah.com is a website. I will get back to you within 24 hours with a quote. Come on now. BestDJinUtah.com. Here in the third block of the Cultural Hall, it is worth noting that the way that JT got to be here in the Cultural Hall is our mutual friend Verlin. We call him the news wizard. He reached out to you and said, hey, you know who you need to chat with. So shout out to him. And if you guys have a guest that you think would be great to come into the Cultural Hall, you can always email us. It is contact@theculturalhall.com. And we would love to hear that suggestion. It's especially great if you know the person that you're suggesting. A lot of times people will say something like, you should interview President Nelson. And it's like, yeah, that would be a great interview. If you have a connection, make that possible, great. Otherwise, we can think of a lot of great interviews as well. But you can send them along, contact@theculturalhall.com. Would love to hear and to see that. Now, running a business, doing the commentary and working with BYU and everything that your life entails now, being a coach to your kid, stepping into that father role and changing, at least in some part, kind of the day-to-day and everything like that. Are there things that as you look at your life, you seem to me to be a very driven person? There are goals. There are things that we've got on the horizon. Are there things that you're like, yeah, and I'm going to write a book and I'm going to do a speaking tour. I'm trying to make myself available to be, and I could see this very easily happening, mission president for one of the missions down in Brazil. Like, are there things like that that you're like, I'm really intentional that I want to be able to move towards this as you get to this part of your life?
Hell will freeze over before I'm a mission president. I can tell you that. So
that's not true. And when that happens, I'll take that phone call or that email from you that says, you saw something that I didn't.
And I'll tell you why. Do you know how nowadays you're able to FaceTime missionaries and they can call you and all of that?
Mm-hmm.
So my wife and I were doing that 15 years ago. And so where you're only allowed to call home twice a year, but I'm like, guys, we get so close with these missionaries and we're working with them that I would tell my wife, I'm like, this is the dumbest rule. And so I would tell the missionary, hey, what is your mom and dad's name? What is their email? And without them know, I would FaceTime them. And I'm like, Mom, Dad, you don't know who I am, but look who I'm next to. And it would just be like the greatest thing for the parents.
Mm-hmm.
And the elders would be on cloud nine because, in Italy, we spent 10 years in Italy, Richie. And so, you're eating pasta morning, afternoon, and evening. And sometimes, my wife is a great cook. We would have them over and have chicken wings and, Japanese food and Chinese food, or go take them to an American restaurant. And so like all of these different things, and the mission presidents never liked that, like to the point that they were like, hey, you need to have, missionaries cannot go have dinner at the Tavernari's home unless there is, an investigator there. And I'm like, what kind of a stupid rule is that? And so, like, a lot of times I would say, hey, consider the waiter to be an investigator,
Uh-huh.
and share, just give him a Book of Mormon or something, and that's type of stuff. And so, like, my wife is an amazing woman. But I know that from that perspective, I really hold her back on probably serving a mission
Mm.
of like being a mission president or something, because I'm like, that's stupid. I'm not gonna do that. Like, go proselytize, go do this. Like, like, you don't feel good, take a day off and read your scriptures and let's go get some McDonald. I mean, and so maybe you do see something in me that I don't see it in myself, but we'll get to that point when we get to that point.
Well, it's so fascinating because I think that at least in our conversation that we've had, I find it refreshing to be like, do the right thing because it's the right thing for you, and because you have a connection with God that you feel like, yeah, you know what, I can walk with God, and it doesn't have to look like everybody else. I think that that probably speaks more to this generation of missionaries. I'm not making it. I don't get to call. I don't get to do any of those things. But I do think that that perspective, especially within such a high demand faith and religion, is something that you can be a loving child of God, a following disciple of Christ, and it doesn't have to look like, and we walk like this, and we look like this, and
Right.
this is that thing. Um, I would be curious also to know. You've mentioned it, and the only reason that I would even kind of speak around it is because you brought it up. So it leads me to think that you're willing to talk about it. The challenges with building a family. You mentioned the miscarriages that have come. I've never experienced that, and just even bringing it up, it's a sobering thing for me to hear about that people experience. But we have such an interesting perspective within the gospel to know that we are building eternal families, and to want
Yeah.
that more than anything, and to have, yes, we're pregnant. Oh, we're not pregnant anymore. Can you take me to that experience for you guys and how the gospel perspective helped you through it?
Yeah. Now, listen, I would be, it would be, um, I don't want to diminish my part of this, because obviously, it takes two people,
Sure.
to bring a kid to life, for that magical thing to happen. But this was, like 100 times harder on my wife than it was on me. And,
Sure.
a lot of times I defer to the things that she has shared with me. I'm going to give you a crazy example, Richie. There was a year, I had just taken off from the island that we lived in to go to Rome, to again catch a plane to go to Brussels, to come down to France to play a game,
Hmm.
and because that's the logistics that we had to do. And by the time I got on the plane to go from Rome all the way to Paris, my wife was having a miscarriage,
Uh,
and she had to go to the hospital by herself.
hmm.
She had to take our little boy at that time by herself. He had to sit on an iPad while she was there, and then she had to drive home all by herself. I mean, think about all of these things. And all the while, I'm on a plane to Paris. It's not Delta. I don't have Wi-Fi in the plane. And so when I land in Brussels and I talk to her, and then she obviously, confides in me. And it's, do I get on a plane back? Well,
Right.
no, because you're only there for a couple of days. And, like, it's already happened. And so, like, there were so many challenges, right? And in terms of building a family, my wife and I usually joke that if you really want to grow spiritually and physically and emotionally to your partner, fly to Europe and have one of you have to direct using Google Maps, and the other one just has to follow directions. Because there were so many times that we were mad at each other. And, I mean, you get mad.
Sure.
Sometimes you wake up and listen, you were sleeping the wrong way, and, you stepped on my toe. And there were so many times that my wife and I would just look at each other and go, I love you. I'm sorry I was wrong. Because we would be driving and I have no idea where I'm going. And if it's not for this woman telling me where to go, then I'm gonna be lost. And so I feel like, to your point, every relationship is unique. The way you grow in your marriage is unique. And the miscarriages, unfortunately, were just part of our journey. I think it's in our closet, or kind of like towards our bathroom. My wife has a picture of the Savior holding three babies,
Mm.
right? And that's because we've had three miscarriages, right? We've actually had four miscarriages. Three of them happened on a span of about less than a year and a half.
Wow.
And so it's just one of those things that, often, she brings it up. Do you think that, Jesus is with our boys or with our girls and with our babies? Are we going to be able to see them again? When we get to where we're going, are they going to be there waiting for us? It was interesting. Recently, it was just me. I actually never even mentioned this to my wife. It was just me and my younger boy, right? We have Xander, who was 12, and we have Zion, who was 4. And I was with Zion, and I said, buddy, you have 3 big brothers or sisters. And he looked at me, and I'm like, yeah, before mommy and I had you, we had 3 babies that unfortunately they weren't able to be born. And you could see the wheels turning on his head
Mhm.
at 4 years old. And, the last thing in his mind was, oh, did mommy get rid of them for some reason?
Right.
Why didn't they get, like in his little mind is, oh, I want to meet my brothers and sisters. Tell me more about them. And
Yeah.
so, and it is something that, a lot of couples have and go through miscarriage. You really don't talk about it because of how painful it is,
Sure.
right? And in my wife's case, she has actually, again, through one of those things, Richie, where she has shared a personal story with someone,
Mhm.
and I was there, and then, someone publicly said, hey, my wife and I just experienced the worst of the worst of a miscarriage. And I was able to then make a post on social media about our experience, about, hey, if you need somebody to talk to, my DMs are open.
Mhm.
You can reach out to me. And that made a world of difference to so many people that would comment and say, gosh, oh man, I had a miscarriage and we did this, this, and that. And that's how we dealt with. And so, again, to kind of like, bring it back to what we shared.
Mhm.
My wife and I work so well together in dealing with problems because at the end of the day, we are going, as we're doing something, how can we magnify of Christ? How can we preach of Christ, speak of Christ, glorify Him, give Him all the credit while we go about our different things? Like I mentioned, my wife speaks Arabic. And, there were multiple times in Italy with refugees from Africa where moms were on the playground and my wife was speaking Arabic to that person,
Jeez.
and so God will meet us where we are, but we have to be willing to have our hearts open. And at least doesn't matter how slow we are getting to Him, but as long as we're making some progress towards Him, He will come to us.
There are 3 questions that we ask everyone who steps into the culture hall. I'll ask those of you now. The first question is do you have a calling right now? And if so, what is it?
I am a elder quorum teacher.
If you could pick a calling for yourself, either one that exists or make one up, what would you pick?
Um, I like to be I'll probably say a teacher, either a Sunday school teacher or an elders quorum teacher. I love my calling. I've had a lot of different callings. I was also in a presidency and leadership, and if I never get called to leadership again, it will be too soon.
Doubling down on the no mission presidency for JT. I get it. I get it. I get it. The final question we ask you to interpret however you would like. But the question is what is your favorite part of your faith?
That as long as I do things the right way, I know that families can be together forever through Heavenly Father's plan.
You gonna sing it? You want to sing it? I'll sing it with you.
I'm not a very good singer, but that's one of the songs, and I don't put my kids down very often because of work, and because of a whole lot of stuff. But
Mhm.
I that's one of my favorite songs to sing them, because that's the reason why I got baptized. A lot of times, Richie, my wife and I talk about this a lot. A lot of times, you need to be remembered who you are. I mean, you have to remember about your faith. One of my favorite things about doing these interviews is that, you get to really focus on a lot of positives, right?
Mhm.
And, we don't have to talk about, some of the negatives because I mean, you don't want to hear about the times that I had an argument and that I lost my patience and I raised my voice and I was mean, or I made a certain hand gesture to somebody in traffic, as they cut me off,
Mhm.
or and usually those are Utah fans, but we don't have to get into that. And so like like, and so the really cool thing for me is, like when I have experiences like this that I get to share my testimony, which is one of the reasons I share my testimony a lot, doing, fast and testimony meeting, is because it reinforces the positive.
Mhm.
It reinforces the thing that I believe. I love the pioneer history and the work and the glory. And I love to think about the sacrifices that people made to get to the Salt Lake Valley. And one of my absolute all-time favorite quotes is there's two, and they're from Brigham Young. One is when Brigham Young went and did something for Joseph Smith, and Joseph made and Brigham Young did the very best he could, but it didn't work out. And Joseph Smith, in front of a bunch of people, just lays into Brigham.
Mhm.
What are you doing? What are you thinking? Blah blah blah. And this is not just some boo boo state mountain, chump. I mean, this is the Lion of the Lord. And Brigham Young, in all of his humbleness, he says, Joseph, I'm sorry. What would you have me do? And that's when Joseph starts running towards him and hugs him and says, hey, you passed. You passed. And, a lot of times I realized, man, I haven't been as good of a husband as I could be, or I can be a better dad. What could I do to help others around me? And, you know, as I get to share my testimony about that, these are things that come to my mind. And and the other one is also from Brigham Young, where Joseph is sick, and people are getting together to understand what happens if Joseph passes, and who leads the church, and what are we going to do.
Mhm.
And everybody has an opinion. And Brigham is, hey, you don't change the calling of a prophet of God. Like, there's one person that gets to do that, and it ain't none of you. And people say, hey, I could tell you some things about your prophet Joseph. And that's when Brigham says, then don't tell me, because what I know, I know. And that, to me, what I know, which is why, I feel confident in my faith that, if I have to do something for work on a Sunday, or if I have to be, obviously I'm not going to go to a club on a Sunday, or
Sure.
go to a pool party, at the Hard Rock swimming pool in Vegas. But if I have to do something, that is a consequence of the life that I've chose on a Sunday, I know that I can wear my faith on my sleeve, and people, usually people know who I am, and they know a little bit about me, and they know that at minimum I am a member of the church, and I can bear my testimony, and they, oh, hey, JT's Mormon and all of that. And so yeah, I'll probably say, that's, families can be together forever, and all because of that, and that's kind of like how I would answer that question about the gospel.
Yeah. Well, JT, Jonathan Tavernari, appreciate the time that we've been able to speak together. I hope that this episode has nourished and strengthened your body, that if you're not healthy enough to listen this week, that you'll be healthy enough to listen next week, and that when the time comes, you will be able to travel home in safety. In the meantime, Chris at Alpine Lakes Travel, Debbie Wanless, Chocolate Cake Bites Podcast, and the Tiger, with a U, will be saving a seat for you on the back row of the Cultural Hall.
Save me a seat, it's sure to be neat on the back row.